الناس لا يريدون إلا كتاب الله ولا يريدون إلا سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم والله المستعان.
شيخ الإسلام says فيما ذكر عنه فبين أن كثيرا من الرجال إذا وصلوا إلى القضاء والقدر أمسكوا. So he says that there are certain types of people. There are many men, many people of the earth, many people from among the Muslims. What they do is when they reach al-qada wal-qadar, they halt at that point. When they reach al-qada wal-qadar, they halt at that point. What does this mean? What does this mean? What he means to say, as Sheikh Al-Fawzan explains, is that when they see things happening in Allah's creation, when they see things like sins and disobedience, when they see, for example, a man drinking, or a man gambling, or a man abandoning his obligations, right? And all the various other types of sins, and even what the people of disbelief do. What they do is they halt at this point, meaning that they believe that Allah Azza wa Jal, from His decree, from His Qadr, He has basically decreed these acts of disobedience upon these people. And therefore, because it is from Allah's decree, we must accept it. We must accept it. Right? So, in other words, what they are doing is, the only thing they see is Allah's decree, that Allah decrees things happen by way of Allah's decree, and so what they see people committing sin, they see people committing shirk, and they think that because Allah has decreed this to happen, that to accept it is part and parcel to be happy with it, to accept it and to be happy with it, and not to challenge it, is part and parcel of believing in Allah's decree. In other words, Allah must be pleased with this if He's decreed it. If Allah's decreed it, if Allah's decreed sin upon somebody, He must be pleased with that. And so, now this is a tremendous, tremendous mistake, because it is not permissible for us to think like this and for us to stop at this point. And this is because Allah Azza wa Jal has given everybody a free choice. He has given everybody a free will. He's given everybody the ability, the capabilities to act and to choose. Everybody has the ability to choose to pray, to choose to fast, to choose to be obedient. Everybody has the ability to either be nice to his children or to be horrible to his children. Everybody has the ability to choose to be nice to his neighbor or to be horrible to his neighbor. Everyone has choice. It's not as if you have been forced to do what you do. Everyone has choice. So you have the choice to pray and to fast and to give charity and to strive in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. So all of this, everybody has qudra, ability. Everybody has istita'a, which is the ability, the prior ability to act. Right? Everybody has al-ikhtiyar, which is choice. Everybody has the ability to choose. You have limbs. You have a heart by which you think and feel and reflect. Right? Everybody has all of these things. So therefore, to think that to accept all of the sin and disobedience and disbelief and polytheism and all the mixture of religions, to think that one must accept them because it is part and parcel of Allah's decree, because Allah has decreed them, and because He's decreed them and they are from His, from what He has created, therefore we must accept it. This is a tremendous and huge mistake. And this is what Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, this is what he means when he says, كَثِيرًا مِنَ الرِّجَالِ, many among the men, إِذَا وَصَلُوا إِلَى الْقَضَاءِ وَالْقَدَرِ أَمْسَكُوا. Many people, many men, when they reach this level of acknowledgement of the qada and qadr, Allah's decree and ordainment, they halt, they stop. And then he continues, إِلَّا أَنَا, except for me. فإني إن فتحت لي فيه روزنة فنازعت أقدار الحق بالحق للحق. He says, except for me, for indeed I dispute the decrees of the truth with the truth for the truth. والرجل من يكون منازعا للقدر لا من يكون موافقا للقدر. And a man is he who contends with qadr. He contends with qadr, not the one who conforms to al-qadr. Alright, now these are tremendous statements. We must understand what he means. We've already explained the first half of what he said. He said there are many people who halt at al-qada wal-qadr, meaning they look around them, they see what is taking place in the creation, they see sins, they see disobedience, they see disbelief, they see polytheism, they see all these things, and they think, because Allah has decreed these affairs, therefore I must accept them. They must be valid, they must be acceptable, because Allah has willed them, Allah has decreed them. And this is a huge mistake, right? Many people, they stop and they think that this is the religion that Allah is pleased with, meaning to accept everything. Why? Because it's all happening by Allah's decree. Therefore, Allah must be pleased with it. And this is wrong. And then he says that although there are many men which are like this, except for me, meaning not me, for indeed I dispute with qadr, I contend with qadr, the decrees of the truth, meaning Allah, with the truth, for the truth. And a man is he who contends with qadr, not the one who basically, complies and conforms. Now what does this mean? What does this mean? He means to say that I am not someone who just looks around himself and sees things taking place, people committing sin, people committing disbelief, people upon disbelief, people following false religion, people worshipping idols, people worshipping men, stars, jinn, trees, and so on and so forth. And I see all of this, I do not stop there. People opposing the sunnah, people entering innovation, people entering bid'ah, people entering heresies. I don't stop at this point and accept it all, because I hold on to the legislation of Allah, what Allah commanded, what He legislated, right? So now we have two things. We have what Allah has decreed, what Allah decrees from His wisdom, and then we have what Allah legislates also from His wisdom. Right? So in other words, He is saying that I look at everything and I don't stop at that. I don't halt at that. I take hold of the legislation, whatever Allah has commanded. And then I treat the decree of Allah, I treat it through the command of Allah, right? So I take the legislation of Allah, I take what He's commanded, and then I use it to understand and to treat whatever He has decreed, right? So in other words, I take from the decree of Allah, this is the decree of Allah, and I also take the legislation of Allah, whatever He's commanded, and then I act upon it. And this is also from the decree of Allah. Right? So in other words, that when I see all this happening around me and people doing what they are doing, I do not just accept this. I do not accept it as an argument that just because Allah's decreed it, He must be happy with it, and I must, and I therefore must be happy with it. I don't stop at that, unlike many other people. Rather, I contend against this decree by the legislation of Allah. So meaning that when I see someone committing a sin, I contend against that. I contend against that decree of Allah by something else which is also from the decree of Allah, which is obedience to Allah. Right? Likewise, I see someone who is committing shirk with Allah. I contend against that decree. I oppose that decree, and I do so through the legislation of Allah, which is also from the decree of Allah. So I worship Allah alone. I do not associate any partners with Him. And that itself is from Allah's decree. Allah is the one who's willed this action upon me. So I fight Al-Qadr with Al-Qadr. Sins and disobedience are from Qadr, but righteousness is also from Al-Qadr. The disbelief of a disbeliever is from Qadr, Allah decreed it, but the Iman of a believer is also from Al-Qadr. Why? Because Allah has given everybody the ability to choose, and the ability to act, and the ability to do something or leave something. Everyone has that ability. And everything is from the decree of Allah. Righteous deeds are from the decree of Allah. Evil deeds are from the decree of Allah. But we cannot use the decree of Allah as an argument, as a justification for evil and shirk and disbelief to be acceptable. Right? We cannot use that as an argument. And this is where we are leading towards. Can you use the argument of Allah's decree for the justification of your own evil actions? Right? This is where we are going with this discussion. Can you use the decree of Allah as an argument to justify your own evil actions or the evil actions of other people? Can you use it to justify false religion? Can you use it to justify the religion of those who worship others besides Allah upon the argument that it is something that Allah has decreed? If He was unhappy with it, why would He decree it upon them? Is this a sound argument? Is this a valid argument? Right? So this is where we are going towards, because many people, they fell into a tremendous mistake because they wrongly thought that whatever Allah decrees, then it must be acceptable to Him. So if a thief steals, it is acceptable to Allah because He decreed it. If a person worships an idol, it is acceptable to Allah because Allah decreed it. If a person murders somebody else, it is acceptable to Allah because He decreed it. If a person worships the cross, or worships an idol, or worships Isa alayhi salam, or worships his mother, Maryam alayhi salam, he worships them, then Allah must be pleased with it because He decrees it. Is this argument correct? Because this is where we are leading to if we do not distinguish between the creational reality and the religious reality. And we do not distinguish between what it means to be an abd of Allah in the universal sense, in the creational sense, and an abd of Allah in the religious sense, in terms of the religious reality. Right? We start entering into this confusion by way of the issue of Allah's decree, Allah's al-qada wal-qadar. So, Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah, This is what he says: I contend against Al-Qadr with Al-Qadr. Because everything is from the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. And to give an example to illustrate to you why this argument is false, and we will continue developing this in the next lesson, inshallah. But just to give you an entrance into this subject, if you imagine that you come to imagine you're traveling on a journey, and on this journey you reach a point where the road splits into two. You can either choose to go on the left-hand side, and if you go on the left-hand side on this path, it will take you through a dangerous town which is full of villains and murderers and thieves, and it is a very dangerous, town for you to travel through, and you are likely to be mugged, you are likely to be killed, you are likely to be robbed, you are likely to have your, there's a threat to life and limb and property. And then on the other hand, you have a different route. On the right hand, there's a different route, and it takes you through a nice, safe, scenic view. Now, at that point, nobody stops and thinks and says to himself that because Allah has decreed for me to go through the left-hand path, through the dangerous town, through the town in which I may be killed or mugged or, robbed or whatever, because Allah has decreed that for me, then I must go through that way. Nobody thinks like that. This is madness, right? Everybody knows from his own day-to-day experience that he actively makes choices, and he actively tries to seek that which is beneficial for him, and he keeps away from that which is harmful to him. Everybody knows that from his personal experience. Nobody puts his hand over the cooker when he puts when he turns on the cooker. No one puts his hand over the gas cooker and says, because Allah decreed for me to have my hand burned, then I will put my hand over the cooker. Right? This is the thinking of a fool. Nobody thinks like this. Everybody knows that he actively seeks to keep away from harm. Right. Now, if that's the case, then in the same way, when it comes to the hereafter, in the hereafter, it is no different. Right? If you want safety in the hereafter, and you want to keep away from harm in the hereafter, it is a matter of choice. It is a matter of choice. So therefore, when you choose to commit sin, when you choose to be disobedient to Allah, when you commit disbelief, you are upon disbelief, or you commit polytheism and shirk, then you have already been told by way of the books and the messengers that this will bring you harm in the hereafter. You cannot use as an excuse that it is the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. Just like you do not use the excuse, just like you do not, for example, put your hand into a fire and say, this was the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. You do not do that, right, in the worldly sense. And it is exactly the same in the religious sense. Why? Because it has become known to you that putting your hand in the fire is a means of harm in this life. And likewise, it has been established and proven upon you and upon all nations that not worshipping Allah alone and worshipping others alongside Allah will enter you in the hellfire in the hereafter. That knowledge has been made known to you. So therefore, if you choose to disobey Allah and you choose that path, then you cannot use Allah's decree as an argument. And you are in the same position as the one who puts his hand in the fire and he says, this was Allah's decree. I had no choice. This was Allah's decree, right? You are the same person, right? So when you commit a sin, when you drink alcohol, for example, when you commit fornication, for example, right? You cannot say, well, this is Allah's decree. This is Allah's decree, and I had no other choice because Allah decreed it for me. That is not a valid argument. That is not a valid argument. Right? Because then you are in the same, what you are doing is the same as if you were to put your hand in a fire and say that was Allah's decree. But you don't do that. Because you know that putting your hand in the fire is harmful to you in this life. So in the same way, it is being made clear to you that sin, disobedience, shirk, kufr, bid'ah, and so on and so forth, that is harmful for you in the hereafter. The two things are equivalent, right? So you cannot make that argument by way of al-Qadr, by way of the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. So likewise, you can't make that argument. So this is one example that can be given. And the second example that can be given to show this argument is false is that if a person makes this argument, if a person comes to you, for example, let's say a sinful Muslim, for argument's sake, and he says, look, I'm sinful, I commit sins, I gamble, I drink, but this is something that Allah has put in my decree. This is something that Allah has willed upon me. What can I do? Right? So then what you do, and I'm only giving this by way of an example. I'm not saying that you actually do this, but I'm giving it as an example. So what you do is you take, you take a stick like a baseball bat and you smack him on the back and you break his kneecaps. Then you go to his house and you smash his windows and then you smash his car. Then you put acid over his car. You stab his tires. You put petrol on his front door and you burn his house down. And then you tell him, this was from the decree of Allah. It was decreed upon me to do that. And so are you happy with this? Do you accept this? And obviously he can't have any argument against this because I can argue by way of Qadr for all of the damage and harm that I did to him. And he's got no argument against me. Rather, for him to be consistent, he must say, yes, I'm happy with everything. It is from the decree of Allah, whatever. You had no choice except to do what you did because Allah decreed it upon you. Now, obviously, he's not going to say that, right? Rather, he wants compensation. He's going to take you to court. He wants retribution. He wants you to pay for his car. He wants you to pay for his house. He's going to demand that. So if he's going to demand that, then how can he argue that the sin that he's doing, the disobedience that he's doing, that this now is somehow a valid argument for him? It is not a valid argument for him at all. So by this, it becomes clear that the argument by way of al-Qadr to justify your sin, disobedience, shirk, bid'ah and everything else, this is invalid. It is not correct. Right? And it is not correct to argue that just because it is happening in Allah's creation, Allah's willed it to happen, therefore He must be pleased with it, and so therefore to accept it, to accept all these different religions, they are all part and parcel of Allah's decree, to accept all these different ways and paths, to accept all these, actions that people are doing, which are really sinful and disobedience, that all of this is acceptable, and this is what religion is. This is what Allah wants. All of this is false argumentation, and inshallah ta'ala, in the next lesson, Shaykh al-Islam will continue speaking about this matter, and we will elaborate upon this a bit further through the speech of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, inshallah, and likewise from the commentary of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. So to conclude today's lesson, we basically moved into this topic of al-Qadr through the previous discussion of the meaning of the word abd, and what it means, the two different meanings, and likewise the creational reality and the religious reality. And if we do not distinguish between these two, then we will start falling into the type of mistake that we have been discussing today regarding Al-Qadr, and using Al-Qadr as an argument to justify all sorts of misguidance and sin, right? This is where we will be led to. And this is what happened to many people in the past.
يا طالب العلم قم لا تنم فإن الزمان انقضى وانصرم فكن ما حييت ضنينا به فظنك بالوقت عين الكرم وكن حلس درسك وافرح به تكن قائدا في غد للأمم